Kent Hovind. I was a high school science teacher for 15 years. Now for the last 12 years, I've been traveling around the world speaking on creation, evolution, and dinosaurs. And I tell people right up front that I believe the Bible is the infallible, inspired, inerrant word of the living God. I believe it from cover to cover. I even believe the cover on mine, it says Kent Hovind. I believe that. And in our first couple of seminars, we talked about the age of the earth. The Bible teaches that God made the world about 6,000 years ago, not millions of years ago. And we cover all that on videotape number 1. Then on tape number 2, we talk about the Garden of Eden. What was it like before the flood when people lived to be 900 years old? And on this session, we're going to talk about dinosaurs. Where do dinosaurs fit into the Bible? This fellow from National Geographic says, no human being has ever seen a live dinosaur. Well, now, wait a minute. Does he know that, or does he think that? He can't know that because he never talked to every human being that ever lived, did he? He never talked to me. He probably never talked to most of you. And I'm sure he never talked to the folks that lived 500 years ago. So that's not a scientific statement to say no human being has ever seen a live dinosaur. That's his theory. He believes that. My Bible says God created the heaven and the earth. And in Exodus 20, it says God did it in 6 days. Well, if God made everything in 6 days, that would include the dinosaurs. So Adam must have seen dinosaurs, since God made everything in 6 days. See, in Genesis chapter 1, verse 6, and we covered all this on video number 2, the Bible says when God first made the earth, there was a water layer, water in the midst of the firmament. There was a layer of water above the air that we're breathing. Now, that water's gone. It all fell down at the time of the flood. But that canopy of water above the atmosphere is one of the reasons they lived to be 900 years old. And during this time when the people are living to be 900 years old, the reptiles would grow to be huge. See, from the creation until the flood, the world was very different than it is now. And then, of course, 2,000 years ago, Jesus came and died on the cross and rose from the dead and is alive forevermore. And here we are today, waiting for the Lord to come back in about 5 minutes. This is the biblical view of history. So before the flood came, the people lived to be 912 on the average. During this time, reptiles, which never stop growing, would be gigantic. Even today, reptiles never stop growing. So before the flood, if you let the reptiles live to be 900 years old, you would have dinosaurs. So the obvious question comes up, did Noah take dinosaurs on the ark? You say, dinosaurs on the ark, they're kind of big, aren't they? Well, the big ones were big, but the little ones were little. And Noah was 600 years old when he built that boat. He probably was smart enough to figure out, you don't have to bring the biggest ones you can find. Bring 2 babies. Just be sure to get a pink one and a blue one. That'll be important later. But there's all sorts of reasons for bringing babies on the ark. For one thing, they're smaller, obviously. The biggest dinosaur egg ever found is smaller than a football. They weigh less. The babies would weigh less. They eat less. They sleep a lot more. And they're tougher. You know, kids fall down and bounce and get up and keep running. Adults fall down and break or lay there for a while. Plus, after the flood's over, they would live longer to produce more offspring, and that's why you're bringing them to begin with. So it makes common sense to bring babies of everything on the ark. Why on earth would you bring 2 giant ones of any species? So he brought babies on the ark. Plus, he only had to bring 2 of every sort. He didn't bring 2 of every species, 2 of the basic kinds of animals. God said, bring them after his kind, after their kind, after his kind. I mean, the Bible says this a whole bunch of times. It's pretty clear. It was the basic kinds of animals, and only those in whose nostrils was the breath of life, and only those on dry land. Noah didn't have to bring any fish. They had plenty of water outside. And he didn't have to bring any bugs because bugs don't have nostrils. They breathe through their skin. Bugs can survive a flood just fine, folks. Go any place where there's been a flood. After the flood water goes down, walk out into the mud and tell me the first thing you notice. Bugs by the zillions, right? They can survive on a floating log mat or dead carcasses or something, or burrow in the mud. I don't know, but total time the land was underwater is not known. We know the time Noah was in the ark was 13 months, but that doesn't mean the earth was submerged for 13 months. Not all locations, all 13 months. Okay, there were parts of the land going up and down. We get into more of that on video number 6. But today there are 250 varieties of dogs. Noah didn't have 250 pairs of dogs on the ark. He just had 2 generic dogs, a mutt, like my dog, Nicky. Nicky is a Canardly. We had him for 12 years before we learned what kind he was. Somebody came to the house a couple years ago and said, oh, you got a Canardly. I said, a what? They said, a Canardly. Take a look at it. You can hardly tell what kind it is. Oh, yeah. pure-blooded canardly. Anyway, Noah probably had just generic horse kind, and it could be the horse and the zebra had a common ancestor. I wouldn't argue about that, but it looked like a horse. The skeptics will say, how did Noah fit those millions of animals on the ark? Well, for one thing, he only brought land animals, and that means no bugs, only those with nostrils too, and you could bring babies. Of course, that's common sense. And to bring 2 of each kind, not 2 of every single variety. Plus, how many animals were there? Some experts say there's about 8,000 different kinds of animals in the world. Now, there are millions of species, but who is deciding what a species is? Who makes this decision anyway? And if you looked at all the thousands of varieties of beetle species, you would say, that's the same kind of animal. Obviously, the very same kind of animal. Plus, how big was the ark? The skeptics will say, Noah couldn't put all those animals on the ark. And I'll say, well, how many were there? They say, we don't know. Oh, well, how big was the ark? We don't know. All we know is he couldn't do it. Oh, I see. Is that the way it works, right? So it beats what they believe. They believe 20 billion years ago there was a big bang where nothing exploded and produced everything. And then 4.6 billion years ago the earth cooled down, developed a hard rocky crust, and it rained on the rocks for millions of years. This is what the textbooks teach the kids, folks, in our town. Look what it says. As the earth formed, the surface was like the moon. The surface was hot, and there were large pools of bubbling lava. But oceans formed as it rained on the rocks for millions of years. Yes, boys and girls, millions of years of torrential rains created the oceans. And swirling in the waters of the oceans is a bubbling broth of complex chemicals. Progress from a complex chemical soup to a living organism is very slow. Boy, I guess it is. Totally stopped. Doesn't even happen. That's how slow it is. This one says, the first self-replicating systems must have emerged in this organic soup. Was your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandpa soup? That's what we teach the kids in school. So they believe 20 billion years ago, Big Bang, 4.6 billion years ago, the earth cooled down, rained on the rocks for millions of years, turned them into soup, and the soup came alive about 3 billion years ago. And this early life form found somebody to marry. Now that's a good trick. And something to eat, of course, and slowly evolved into everything we see today. I was sharing this at a university in Boston one time. They said I could come speak to their college if their professors could ask me any questions they wanted. They wanted to show their students how dumb the creationists really were. I said I would be honored to come for that. And so I went through what the Bible teaches. 6,000 years ago, God made everything. 4,400 years ago, there's a flood that destroyed everything. And, Noah took 2 of each kind on the ark. And then I went through what they believe, 20 billion years ago, et cetera, et cetera. One professor was getting kind of mad at me. He said, now, Dr. Hovind, there are hundreds of varieties of dogs in the world. I said, yes, sir, you're right about that. He said, do you mean to tell me that all these dogs in the world came from just 2 dogs on Noah's ark? You expect me to believe that? Ha, ha, ha. I said, sir, would you look at what you're teaching your students? You're teaching your students that all the dogs in the world came from a rock. He didn't have any more questions after that. I was in a university one time. I was going through this, mentioned how evolutionists teach. We all came from a rock. And this one lady came to me afterwards, walking down the aisle. Boy, she was mad. You could see the smoke coming out her ears. I thought, wow, I've had it now. I stood there quietly, shaking in my boots, She said, tonight, you said we believe we come from a rock. We do not believe that. I said, well, ma'am, do you believe in evolution? She said, yes, I do. I'm a professor here at the university. I said, okay, well then, where did we come from? She said, we came from a macromolecule. I said, where did that come from? She said, from the oceans, from the prebiotic soup. I said, and where did that come from? She said, well, it rained on the rocks for millions of years. And it slowly dawned on her, I guess I do believe I come from a rock, don't I? Yes, ma'am, you certainly do. Here's one evolutionist life verse. Saying to a stock, thou art my father, and to a stone, thou hast brought me forth. Anyway, God told Noah the earth was corrupt. He said, that's it, I'm going to destroy the earth. It is filled with violence, it is corrupt. And God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make thee an ark. And so Noah said to his boys, hey boys, go for wood. We got to build a boat quick. And so they went and got a bunch of wood, and they built this big boat. Now, after the flood was over, Noah's son, Shem, had a son and named him Arphaxad. Who on earth would ever name a kid Arphaxad? Can't you see that kid in kindergarten? What's your name, son? Arphaxad. Do you know how to spell it? No? Nobody does. But don't you think one day little Arphaxad's getting big enough, he's sitting on Grandpa Noah's lap, and he starts looking around. He says, hey, Grandpa, I got a question. How come we're the only people in the whole world? You know, where is everybody? I mean, eventually that thought's going to cross his mind, don't you think? And Noah's going to tell the story of the flood to little Arphaxad. Actually, Noah and his son Shem are going to tell that story to many generations to come. Did you know Shem lived long enough to know Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? See, God made sure there was somebody with an eyewitness, one of those I was there testimonies, hanging around for many years. I wouldn't split a church over it, preacher, but I suspect Adam and Eve did not have a belly button. Now that would be an awesome evangelistic tool. You see any kid walking down the street, you know he's one of your relatives somehow. One of your great-great-great-great-grandkids. Hey, kid, come here. Take a look at this. Wow. Sit down, son. Let me tell you a story. And win them to the Lord, right? My mind works in those channels. I don't know. Anyway, so after the flood was over, they told the story to their grandkids and great-grandkids. And this, after the Tower of Babel, people spread out around the world speaking different languages, but the story persisted in their memory. And today there are 270 surviving flood legends. Why would there be 270 surviving flood legends? Well, that's because there was a flood. A worldwide flood, too. We got guys like Hugh Ross claiming it was just a local flood in the days of Noah. I said, Hugh, if it's just a local flood, why would God tell Noah to build that big boat and stay on there for a year with it full of animals? Tell Noah to move. It's not a local flood. But he accepts the idea the earth is billions of years old, and he knows that if he accepts the idea of a worldwide flood, that's going to wipe out any evidence of the world before that, and so he's got to try to... if you accept the earth as billions of years old in the geologic column, then you have to deny the local flood, or the worldwide flood of the days of Noah. You don't have any other choice. And so that's what he does. And we've got a whole series of tapes just on Hugh Ross and what he believes. It's check on our website for the Hugh Ross videotapes for more on that. Anyway, this flood story persists today in 270 different versions. The Hawaiian legend says, long after the death of Kunihana, the first man, the world became a wicked, terrible place to live. There was one good man left. His name was Nu'u. He made a great canoe with a house on it and filled it with animals. The waters came up over all the earth and killed all the people. Only Nu'u and his family were saved. The Chinese have a story called the Hai King Classic. It's one of the oldest known stories in the world, I believe. It says Fu Hai is the father of their civilization. The story says Fu Hai, his wife, 3 sons, and 3 daughters escaped a great flood. He and his family were the only people alive on earth. After the great flood, they repopulated the world. Well, that sounds kind of like the Bible story too, doesn't it? The Toltec Indians in Mexico have a legend that says the first world lasted 1,716 years and was destroyed by a flood. Only one family named Cox survived. 1,700 years. Well, the Bible says more like 1656 if you add up the dates, but that's not bad for a legend 4,000 years old to only be 60 years off. Interesting. So what about this flood anyway? Why would there be so many flood legends? You know, the atheists are real quiet about this topic because they know there are so many flood legends. If there weren't any flood legends, they would be saying, hey, if there was a worldwide flood, why don't we have some legends about it? Wouldn't they be saying that? But they're real quiet about this topic. So if you look at a map of Turkey, on the far right-hand side is a mountain called Mount Ararat. On a Turkish map, this is called Noah Ungomshi, which means Noah's big boat. Now, the Bible does not say the ark landed on Mount Ararat, though it could have. The Bible says the ark rested in the 7th month. Now, that's interesting. Why didn't Noah get out till the 13th month? Why stay in there for 6 more months? Well, we cover all that on video number 6. Why the extra time in the ark? But it says the ark rested on the mountains, plural, mountains of Ararat. Many people think Noah's ark is on Mount Ararat. There are 2 basic theories among Christians of where Noah's ark is, if anything survived from a wooden boat 4,400 years ago. Maybe nothing is there. Maybe there isn't an ark, okay? But if there is one, there are 2 theories, 2 general theories of where it is. Some people think it's actually on Mount Ararat, buried in ice. I know many folks that have been up there scores of times looking for this, okay? John Morris is a good friend of mine. Carl Baugh is a good friend of mine. They both think it's on Mount Ararat, and it could be, I don't know. But they haven't found it for sure yet. Other people think it's down in the valley, and they think this is Noah's ark. I knew Ron Wyatt real well before he died. I just talked to his wife about an hour ago, called to make sure I got all my details straight. They're up in Nashville, Tennessee. Ron died a couple years ago, but he and many other folks think Noah's Ark is south of Mount Ararat, about 17 miles. They've got a website, WyattMuseum.com, and his partner, Richard Reeves, took over for him. He's a good friend of mine. Here's Richard and Mike and I together. Mike also travels and speaks on creation. They say the Ark has collapsed on itself and folded out to the side. It's much wider than it used to be. And this Ark is about 515 feet long, 300 Egyptian cubits. They found iron rivets all over that region. The government of Turkey says that's Noah's Ark. They even built a visitor center there, but it's not a safe place to go right now. People getting killed over there. I guess it's getting a little better here in the early 2000, early part of this decade. But there's been several articles written in Creation Magazine saying it is not Noah's Ark. Well, I love Creation Magazine, and I encourage everybody to get it. It's one of the best creation magazines I know of, and I would encourage you to get it. However, I think they jumped the gun on this one. I called Ron when the article came out and said, Ron, let me read this article to you. I read the whole thing to him. He answered every single objection they had. I said, did they ever call you before they wrote this? He said, no. I said, well, that would have solved the problem, wouldn't it? But they're saying it's not Noah's Ark. I don't know. It doesn't matter to me. I'm just saying there are two views of where Noah's Ark might be. The Bible says the ark will be 300 cubits long. Now, a cubit is elbow to fingertip. Probably Moses would have used the Egyptian cubit, since he went to school in Egypt, and the Egyptian cubit is 20.6 inches. That would make the ark 515 feet long, and that boat-shaped object is indeed 515 feet long. So I don't know if that's it or not, but it could be. That makes it about 2/3 the size of the Titanic. So it's a pretty good-sized boat. In that region, they found rocks that weigh 9,000 pounds. These rocks have holes through the top, but the hole is curved. I've built 9 or 10 houses. I've drilled thousands and thousands of holes. I don't know how you would drill a curved hole through a rock, but they did, okay? And the bigger rocks have bigger holes, apparently to hold a bigger rope to hang this thing over the side of the boat. That's the best theory anybody's come up with. They say these things were drogue stones. In the Navy, they call them a sea anchor. They have a parachute they shoot down into the water, and it kind of keeps the boat stabilized from shaking around during stormy weather. It anchors you to the water as best as you can be anchored to water. And these drogue stones will prevent the boat from shaking very bad. Plus, if it gets real windy, they drag behind you, and the boat is always turned at a right angle to the waves. Now you can't capsize. One atheist said, Hovind, you're so stupid. Don't you know if he had rocks hanging all over the boat, it would slow him down? He wasn't trying to go anywhere. He's just trying to float. So you probably want to know where you were when you landed. You know, I'd put real long ropes on mine, let the rocks drag the bottom, so I could figure out where I was when I got off. So one skeptic I debated, he's a former preacher turned atheist. He said, you can't have a boat more than 300 feet long because it'll bend when it goes over the waves. It'll break. And he gave an example of a six-master, a boat that had 6 masts with sails. First place, Noah's Ark didn't have any masts. It wasn't designed to sail. It's designed to float, okay? Secondly, they had all kinds of technology back then. They were living for 900 years. You could learn a lot in 900 years. Plus, God gave Noah the directions on how to build the thing. So you can rest assured it'll be fine. And God was in there with him. God said to Noah, come thou into the ark. He didn't say go into the ark. Now, preacher, that'll preach, okay? You can't preach a sermon on that one. You ain't got much preach in you at all. Okay? God said, come into the ark. Anyway, if Noah's Ark had a moon pool, it's not a problem. I don't know if it did or it didn't, but this certainly would solve the problem. A moon pool is a hole in the floor with walls built up inside. And when you go over the waves, the water doesn't have to lift the ends of the boat up. It just goes up and down inside the hole. Plus, water moving up and down inside that hole would make like a giant piston, and it would pump fresh air in and out of the boat every time you hit a wave. Keep in mind, he had a boatload of animals. You might actually pray for a good wave once in a while. Hey, Lord, we're about to feed the elephants. Would you, send a little wave here, please? Anyway, what happened to the dinosaurs after the flood? Question's been asked for many years. The kids are always asked in school, what made the dinosaurs go extinct? Boys and girls, do you think a meteor hit the Yucatan Peninsula in 65 million BC and made the dinosaurs go extinct? They're asking the wrong question. The question is not what made them go extinct. The question is, did they go extinct? See, the liberals are great at getting us to argue about the totally wrong subject. I was on a Canadian radio show one time, sort of like the Rush Limbaugh show in Canada, And this guy, he was a very hostile host. I get those a lot. He said, Dr. Hovind, do you think we should teach the Bible in public schools? Should we have prayer in public schools? Should we teach creation in public schools? I said, sir, slow down. I'll be glad to answer all those questions. However, there's another question we need to ask first. Should we have public schools? Boy, he hit the ceiling on that one. Hey, you better read your Constitution, folks. According to the 10th Amendment, the federal government has no business being involved in education. Zero. I'm not running for president, but if I was, first thing I'd do is shut down the Department of Education. Send those guys home, okay? The states ought to run the schools, not the federal government. By the way, the federal government's got no business being involved in welfare either. We could get off on a long rabbit trail on 10th Amendment if you'd like, but back to the issue. If you want to find out why the schools went public as part of a long-range plan toward a new world order, you might want to get the website exodus2000.org. We'll get into more of that some other time. But after the dinosaurs got off the ark, they faced a very hostile climate. See, the world had been destroyed. Remember, before the flood, the people averaged over 900 years old. After the flood, it was only 400, and then 200, and then 100. And today, not many make it to 100. So the first thing that happened to the dinosaurs after the flood, they were dying off from the climate change. They just simply couldn't live long enough to grow as big as they used to before the flood, and some species probably quickly went extinct in the new environment. Also, after 6 months of waiting to get out of the ark, how tall would the trees be all around the world? Not very big, right? Maybe there just wasn't enough for some of them to eat afterwards. I don't know. But it was just a hostile word. The second problem they had, people were killing them. Back in those days, they called them dragons. And they slew them for meat and because they were a menace and for medicine and who knows what all. But they were slaying the dragons. See, the word dragon is mentioned in the Bible 35 times. The word dinosaur wasn't made up till 1841. So, of course, they didn't call them dinosaurs. There was no such word. They called them dragons. 35 references to dragons in the Bible. And as the population of people began to grow after the flood, the population of dragons began to go down. Nobody wants to live next door to a dragon. You don't want your kids out playing on the street, right? Hey, the same thing happened right here in Escambia County, in Santa Rosa County, Florida. How many grizzly bears are roaming loose in the panhandle in Florida? 0, right? How many were there 500 years ago? Probably lots of them, right? But as people move into an area, the big ferocious animals are killed off or driven off. If it came on the evening news tonight that there were 5 grizzly bears roaming around the panhandle in Florida, what would happen by 6 a.m.? Every redneck in the country would be out there with his rifle trying to shoot one, right? And whoever could shoot the biggest one would be a hero. They'd put his picture in the paper, you know, I shot the grizzly bear and saved the village. You know that's what would happen. And that's what happened to the dragons. People slew dragons because you could be a hero. And if you could kill a big one, they'd tell stories about you for a long time. Gilgamesh is famous for slaying a dragon. Some Chinese guy named Yu, after the flood, surveyed the land of China. He divided the land into sections, and he built channels to drain the water off to the sea and make the land livable again. The story says many snakes and dragons were driven from the marshlands. There are all sorts of dragon stories. In 600 BC, the Babylonian kingdom had as their symbol the god Marduk on top of a fire-breathing dragon. You say, now, Brother Hovind, you don't believe in fire-breathing dragons, do you? Oh, yeah, I do. See, the Bible talks about a fiery flying serpent in Isaiah chapter 14. In Job 41, it's got a whole chapter about Leviathan. It says, out of his mouth go burning lamps, and sparks of fire leap out. Out of his nostrils goeth smoke. I've seen deacons do that on the front steps of churches. As a seething pot or cauldron, his breath kindleth coals, and a flame goeth out of his mouth. We've got a whole videotape just about Leviathan, the fire-breathing dragon, if you want to get that out there on the table. But if you get a Catholic Bible, you'll find the book of Daniel has 2 extra chapters. They're called part of the Apocrypha books. I don't think they're inspired and shouldn't be in the Scriptures for sure, but they're interesting reading. It says, there was a great dragon in the place, and the Babylonians worshipped him. And the king said to Daniel, behold, thou canst not say now that this is not a living God. Adore him, therefore. And Daniel said, I adore the Lord my God, for he is the living God, but that is no living God. But give me leave, in other words, give me permission, that's an old way to say it. Give me leave, O king, and I will kill this dragon without sword or club. And the king said, I give thee leave. Then Daniel took pitch and fat and hair and boiled them together and made lumps and put them into the dragon's mouth. And the dragon burst asunder. What a strange story. Let me give you the Hovind version of what's going on. The Bible tells us that Daniel was a man of science. And Daniel knew that pitch is made from tree sap and it's sticky. He knew that fat is salty tasting, and just about all animals like salty tasting things. That's why they put out salt blocks, for the cows and for the deer. And hair won't digest. So Daniel mixed the three together, made lumps, fed them to the dragon. The dragon liked the taste, swallowed them, but they wouldn't digest. And so they plugged up his intestines. And these were the days before Roto-Rooter, and he burst asunder. You figured it out, okay? But Saddam Hussein. Hey, did you ever notice George Bush always called him Saddam Hussein? Kind of interesting. Saddam is the Arabic word that means prince. Saddam is spelled the same way, it's just pronounced different. That's an Arabic word that means horse's rear end. So George always called him Saddam Hussein. I'm sure they appreciated that over there. But anyway, Saddam thinks he is Nebuchadnezzar reincarnated. I mean, the guy has a serious ego problem, okay? He's got huge pictures of himself all over the countryside. He put his picture in front of Nebuchadnezzar's picture on their gold coins. Saddam spent a fortune rebuilding the ancient city of Babylon. Did you know ancient Babylon has been rebuilt? They are using it today. When they found the old brick walls of the original city, they'd been preserved in the dry sand over there. They found dragons on these brick walls from 600 BC. Apparently they knew about dragons in 600 BC. Alexander the Great knew about dragons in 300 BC. He reported in his diary that his soldiers were scared by dragons when they conquered part of India in 300 BC. In the 2nd century after Christ, this mosaic was made showing long-necked dragons fighting, or kissing. You can't tell what's happening for sure, but boy, that would be necking, wouldn't it? Wow. Oh, anyway, how did the Romans know about dragons in the 2nd century after Christ? St. George is famous for slaying a dragon in 275 AD. Beowulf slew dragons. He was finally killed by a dragon when he's 88 years old. If you ever get the Beowulf story, and I've got it at home, the Old English is impossible to read, for me anyway, but they've translated the Old English into modern English, and the story says he killed Grendel the dragon by pulling off one of its arms, and the creature bled to death. Pulled off his arm. Well, they found an old Babylonian cylinder seal showing a man pulling the arm off of a dragon. Maybe that's how you had to kill him. I don't know. But there are dragon legends from countries all over the world. I mean, it's just common to find this. Ancient pottery from 3,000 years ago will have dragons on there. This is from the first pharaoh of the United Egypt, a piece of pottery, slate pottery, showing two long-necked dinosaurs. This guy says nobody's ever seen a live dinosaur. Well, how did they put them on their pottery? I think they did see live dinosaurs. An ancient hippo tusk was found in a tomb from 12th century BC, showing an animal with a long neck and a long tail. The only animals I know that have both a long neck and a long tail are dinosaurs. Giraffes have a long neck, but they don't have a long tail. And you can go to just about any country that has ancient, historical roots, and you'll find dragon legends. I mean, it's just universal. All of them have this. The Russian medallion here shows a man slaying a dragon. There's a Bulgarian postage stamp with a man shooting a dragon. An Irish writer reported that somebody killed a dragon that had iron nails on its tail in 900 AD. There are websites about dragons, some of them, New Age and all that kind of stuff. I don't know that I can recommend any of them, but it's interesting to study all the legends of dragons. My ancestors, the Norwegians, 1,000 years ago, had dragon heads on their ships. Why did the Vikings put dragon heads on their ships? Well, they sure had a lot of stories about the dragons and the Kraken, the great dragon of the sea. Siegfried is famous for slaying the dragon Fafnir about 1,000 years ago. Marco Polo lived in China for 17 years. When he came back, he reported the emperor is raising dragons to pull chariots in his parades. Why would he say that? Well, I think it's because the emperor was raising dragons to pull chariots in his parades. That's my theory anyway. By the way, in 1611, the post of royal dragon feeder was appointed. You can get the old Chinese law books and look it up. Why do you need a royal dragon feeder? To feed the dragon. They probably really had one in China just 400 years ago, folks. The city in France was renamed to honor the man who slew the dragon. Nurluc, France. Indians apparently hunted dinosaurs because they carved their images on the walls of Grand Canyon. Canyons all over the West will have these dinosaurs on there. Interesting. There's one with a round body, 4 legs, long neck. Right there in Blanding, Utah, at the state park, there's a dinosaur picture carved on the walls. Australians painted them on the walls of their caves, too. They saw live dinosaurs. I don't know how to pronounce the name of that lake up in Canada, but there's a dinosaur, looks like, painted on the walls up there of the cliff in Canada. This guy says nobody's ever seen one. Well, he doesn't know that. He thinks that. Down in Ica, Peru, they've got the driest desert in the world. That's my understanding of it. The Spanish came across there in 1571 and reported there are rocks that have strange animals on there. They also saw these lines in the desert, white lines. Nobody knew what the lines were until they got airplanes. When you get way up there, you can notice this is actually a giant picture. How many have heard of those before? They're called the Nazca lines, okay? These rocks, though, that they found were interesting. They brought some back to the king of Spain. The king said, "What are these animals on here? I've never heard of an animal like this." They found about 50,000 rocks is what the estimate is, I understand. One doctor collects them. He's got 11,000 in his private collection. They're called the Nazca stones. They think they were made about the time of Christ, plus or minus a few hundred years. Just about every known dinosaur is found carved on these rocks. Some little bitty rocks, some are great big rocks. Here's a fella hitting one on the head with something. Better hit him hard first hit. That might be the only one you get, right? Dr. Ball is a good friend of mine. He's got some of the stones from Ica, Peru. He's also got some textiles there, as does Don Patton, has some of the material from Ica, Peru. You can call their address and phone number there. These stones have all these dinosaurs carved on there. I want you to notice this stone. In the front, you will see circles on the side of the dinosaur. We cover a lot more on that later on, but circles on the side of the dinosaur. Anton Willette's a friend of mine. He went down there for 8 months and studied the Ica stones. Dennis Swift is a pastor in Oregon. He's a good friend of mine. He goes down there once or twice a year and studies this subject of the Ica stones. Again, you'll see the circles on the side of the dinosaur. Now, when you find dinosaur bones, you don't know what the skin looked like, obviously, right? About 10 years ago, fossilized dinosaur skin was found, and it has circles on the side. And the only way they could have known to do that on the rocks was if they had seen a live one, all right? You couldn't tell that from the bones. Here's a chief about to cut the head off of one. Here's a guy riding one of the dinosaurs. This pottery piece shows a dinosaur on the side of it. They found a mummy down there with a blanket wrapped around it and had dinosaurs on it. All around this blanket, images of dragons. In Acambaro, Mexico, they found 56,000 more stones and ceramic pieces made like dinosaurs with humans. 56,000 of them. This guy says nobody's ever seen one. I don't think he did much research before he said that. A guy in Italy, 400 years ago, smacked a dragon on the head because it was bothering his cows. They had the body stuffed and mounted by a scientist in Italy in 1572. You could go to the museum and see a dinosaur on display. Not the bones, the skin, stuffed by a taxidermist. Roman swords were found in Arizona. By the way, kids, if you're taught that Columbus was the first white man to cross the ocean, that's not correct. There was trade back and forth across the Atlantic for centuries. Brendan the Navigator apparently came over here from Ireland in 500 AD. The Romans went back and forth across the ocean. These Roman swords were found in Tucson, Arizona. One of the swords has a dinosaur on it. I called the guy that's got the sword, Tom Peterson. I said, "Tom, what do you think about this sword with a dinosaur?" He said, "Well, it has to be fake because we know man and dinosaurs did not live at the same time." Does he know that or does he think that? He thinks that. You can't know that. During the age of sailing ships, there are thousands of legends of people sighting sea monsters. Why would there be so many stories of sea monsters? The missionary Hans Egede reported a sea monster in the 1700s. The Bishop of Norway reported a sea monster in 1755. Captain Mackay reported a sea monster, swam under the boat for 20 minutes. The sailors begged him not to say anything in the logbook because they knew they would get laughed at. But they reported it anyway. In 1850s, a whaling ship, the Monongahela, set sail to go out and catch some whales. That's what they do. They saw a giant sea monster. I wish we had time to go through the whole story, but you can get the book. It's in the UWF library. I forget which book has it. Sea Monsters, I think, is the title of the book. And it's in QL 89. If you go there to the library, you can find it there. But the story says they killed a 103-foot sea monster. The sailors said it had 2 blowholes, 4 swim fins, alligator-like teeth, alligator-like head, and 94 very sharp teeth. A passing ship stopped as the crew was cutting it up, and they bought some barrels of sea serpent oil before they sailed home to tell the story. The Monongahela captain said, look, we're going to go get a few whales, then we're going to come back to port, and we will show everybody the bones of the sea monster. We saved them in the boat. We will prove sea monsters exist. Well, the Monongahela sailed on, but was never heard from again. Apparently, it sank in a storm. Nobody knows for sure, but in 1907, Arthur Henry Ralston, who later died on the Titanic, said they were sailing off the coast of Ireland, and he reported a sea monster. He drew sketches of it as it moved. I want you to notice, a sea serpent he called it. I want you to notice the next sentence in this book. The book is called Titanic, Triumph and Tragedy. The author says, however imaginative the young officer may have been, do you see any prejudice in that statement? In other words, if you claim you saw a sea monster, we know you're, a little crazy, right? A German submarine sank a British ship during World War I, and a 60-foot sea animal came flying up out of the water with 4 big flippers. There are stories of octopus pulling ships underwater. You say, oh, come on, octopus never get that big. Oh, they get pretty big. This one washed up on the beach in St. Augustine, Florida, 100 years ago. The octopus was 200 feet across and weighed 5 tons. That's a big octopus. They killed a whale in Seattle, Washington. Inside the whale's stomach was 1 arm to an octopus that was 150 feet long. See, whales love to eat octopus. But octopus and squid never stop growing. Now, if you're an animal that never stops growing, someday you might reach the size where you no longer have any enemies. It's all downhill from there, right? And by the way, if a whale eats too much octopus, he'll get sick and puke it back up. And if you ever see a piece of puked up octopus floating around in the ocean, be sure to grab it, because it's worth a lot of money. Anybody know what they make out of puked up octopus? Perfume. That's correct. That explains a few things, doesn't it, fellas? Hey, dear, you smell like a puked up octopus. Anyway, some awfully giant squids have been reported. A Navy vessel saw a giant squid and a giant whale battling it out one time up by Canada. Peabody Museum has a model of a giant squid over my head there. This baby giant squid washed up on the beach in New Zealand. They said it would have been 150 feet long, full grown. This was a baby giant squid. So some of the skeptics say, okay, now Hovind, if dinosaurs are dragons, and they're mentioned all through history, how come dinosaurs aren't mentioned in the Bible? Well, they are. Dinosaurs are in the Bible. You say, I read my Bible, I didn't see them in there. Well, of course, they're not going to use the word dinosaur. That word wasn't made up till 1841, and if you got a Bible, a King James, it'll be 1611, and they didn't mention it back before the word was made up, okay? But if you look at the book of Job, Job has 42 chapters. It's right dead center in your Bible, just before Psalms. In the first 2 chapters, Job lost everything. But the story starts off and says, Job was a perfect man. He feared God and hated evil. And Job had 7 sons and 3 daughters. And he had thousands of sheep and camels and oxen and asses. He was rich. And one day the messenger came and said, Job, I got some bad news. All the oxen and asses got stolen, and they killed all your servants. And by the way, the sheep all burned up, and the camels got stolen also. Job's having a bad day. And by the way, Job, all your sons and daughters just died. The house fell in on them. And to top it off, the devil gave Job boils from the top of his head to the bottom of his feet. A boil is like the world's worst zit. And Job was covered in them. And then his wife turned against him. And to top it off, his 4 friends came to visit him. One of those guys was the shortest man mentioned in the Bible, Bildad the Shuhite. That's pretty short, folks, okay? Anyway, these 4 guys came and they talked to Job for 35 chapters. Most of the book of Job is these 4 guys telling Job why everything went wrong. They had to be Baptists, the way I got it figured. That's what I am. They said, Job, everything went wrong, huh? We know why. You sinned. Now listen, folks, if something bad happens to somebody, you don't know why it happened. You should love them, pray for them, encourage them, and shut up. Okay, don't go to the hospital when they're getting their gallstones taken out and say, hey, brother, these ain't gallstones, you know. These are tithes and offerings. God's getting them out of you one way or another. Don't do that, okay? Let God take care of why everything's going wrong. See, Job didn't know about what's going on himself, and he said, man, I wish the Lord would answer me. Why is this happening to me? See, Job didn't know about Romans 8:28. It hadn't been written yet, but it was coming. The Lord said, we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them that are the called according to his purpose. Now that verse does not say everything that happens is good. It says everything will work together for good. That's a big difference. I'll show you. Has anybody here ever been hungry? You ever been hungry? You suppose you come to my house, you say, Brother Hovind, I'm hungry. I'll say, hey, come on in, have a seat. I'm going to give you a cup of flour. That ought to hold you over. No, I got it. How about a spoonful of salt? Now that ought to taste good. Hey, lean back. I'm going to shovel in a spoonful of baking soda. That'll fill you up. That'll stick to your ribs. Well, how about a half a cup of Crisco? How about a cup of buttermilk? Some people really drink that stuff. Well, how about let's mix them all together and make biscuits? All right, well, now we're talking, right? See, the individual ingredients would taste lousy, but they work together for good, don't they? And the individual things in your life might not be too good, but they will work together for good. God promised they would if you love him and you keep your heart right with God. Now that'll be tough to do. You see, the heart is deceitful and desperately wicked. So Job is sitting there scraping the pus out of the boils, wondering, why did this happen to me? And the Lord came down in chapter 38 and answered Job out of a whirlwind. Boy, if a tornado starts talking to me, I'm going to pay attention. And the Lord said, who is this that darkeneth counsel by words without knowledge? In other words, your 4 buddies did not know what they were talking about. The Lord said, gird up now thy loins like a man, for I will demand of thee, and answer thou me. Where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? You know, I read that question back in 1969 when I first got saved, and I thought, what a dumb question. Where were you when I built the earth? How many of you were here when God made the earth? Okay, now kids, this is going to be complicated, so listen carefully. Since you were not here when God made the earth, that means that God is older than you are. How many can figure that out with no help? Okay? Did it ever occur to you that God is also stronger than you are? Did it ever occur to you that God is smarter than you are? Did it ever occur to you that God is richer than you are? You say, Brother Hovind, everybody's richer than I are. Well, God certainly is, okay? Hey, try this one. Did it ever occur to you that nothing ever occurred to God? I've thought about that one till my brain hurts. Did you know God knows everything you're thinking? The Bible says he understands the imaginations of the thoughts. Oh, now that's interesting. God knows all your thoughts. And get this, he loves you anyway. Wow, what a nice guy. So Job is sitting there scraping the pus out of the boils, wondering what's happening. God comes down and starts asking Job questions. God says, Job, where were you when I built the earth? Job doesn't answer the question. So God asked him another one. Declare, if thou hast understanding, who hath laid the measures thereof, if thou knowest? Question mark. Job doesn't answer. So God asked him another one. Hast thou entered into the springs of the sea? Did you know scientists didn't even know there were springs in the sea till 1977? God asked Job that question 4,000 years ago. Science is just now catching up with that verse. God says, where is the way where light dwelleth? Now that's an interesting verse. Did you know light doesn't stay in a place? It's in a way. It's always moving. Interesting. God said, by what way is the light parted which scattereth the east wind upon the earth? Now wait a minute. Does the light really cause the wind? Ask any weatherman. It sure does. See, the sunlight heats up the ground, makes the warm air mass expand, and then the wind patterns are driven by the sunlight. They'll tell you that. God said, canst thou send lightnings? Boy, it's a good thing I can't. How many of you can think of somebody that's lucky to be alive because you can't send the lightnings? Yeah, you can think of several there, right? Maybe a sergeant in the military, right, during boot camp. Oh. God asked Job question after question after question. By my count, he asked him 84 questions. Job never said a word. These are the kind of questions that don't need an answer. The question is designed to change the person's attitude. These are the same kind of questions you dads have to ask your kids. See, I have 3 kids, one of each. I know what I'm talking about. Kids get to a certain age, and they start to get kind of cocky, and they think, you know, they ought to make the rules around the house. The kid comes in one day and says, hey, Dad, listen, I'm taking the keys to the car, and I believe I should be allowed to stay out till 4 in the morning with my friends. After all, I'm 10 now. Dad says, hold on just a minute, kid. You'd like to know why you can't stay out till 4 in the morning? Well, son, let me ask you a couple of questions. Who pays the electric bill around this house? Who pays the gas bill? Who's paying for the house? Who pays for the insurance? Who bought them clothes you're wearing, son? Who paid for the bed you slept on last night? Who pays for the food you eat and eat and eat and eat and eat? Who paid for the hot water and soap you took a shower with about a month ago? Let's just get it straight, son. The Bible is very clear. He who payeth the bills maketh the rules. Second Opinions, chapter 4. You see, son, me, Dad, you, kid. And if you're going to sleep under my roof and eat my food, you're going to do it my way. And when you want to do it your way, go get your own roof to sleep under and get your own food to eat, and you can do it your way. That's the golden rule, son. He that hath the gold maketh the rules. Who do you think you are, kid? Where were you when we got this property and cleared this land and drove off the grizzly bears and walked uphill to school 40 miles in the snow, barefoot, both ways? Me, Dad, you, kid. I think that's what God is doing with Job. God asked Job 84 consecutive questions. Job never answered one. By the way, God never answered Job's questions either. God never told him why his kids died. Would you keep serving the Lord if everything went wrong and you never found out why? All God did was ask him question after question after question. And it made Job realize who on earth he's talking to. Man, I'm talking to God. You know, folks, I think we got a problem in America. We don't understand who God is. We got an awful lot of Christians and non-Christians that envision God as some little guy we go visit once a week on Sunday, if at all. You're going to find out Judgment Day, okay? We come to chapter 40, and God says, behold now behemoth. Now, what on earth is a behemoth? Well, some reference Bibles say it could be the elephant or hippopotamus. No, it cannot be either of those, okay? I think behemoth is the long-necked dinosaur. Now, there are 13 varieties of long-necked dinosaurs. There's the brachiosaur, the apatosaur, the cetosaur, mamenchosaur, diplodocus, the suprasaurus, the blondosaurus. You just have to talk to her kind of slow, okay? Oh, hey, look. I understand. All right. God says he eats grass as an ox. You say, no, Brother Hovind, elephants eat grass, and my Bible says elephant. A lot of animals eat grass, okay? You better look at the next verse. His strength is in his loins, and his force is in the navel of his belly. The biggest part on him is his belly. You say, no, wait a minute, elephants have a big belly. Yeah, they sure do. Hippos have a big belly. Brachiosaurus has a big belly. He has a big belly. We better look at the next verse, okay? He moveth his tail like a cedar. Have you ever seen an elephant's tail? Not like a cedar tree. How about a hippo tail? No, it's not like a cedar tree either. Next verse says, his bones are as strong pieces of brass. His bones are like bars of iron. This guy has big, heavy-duty bones. And they did, too, by the way. I've got a copy of one right here. The real one's at home. This is a replica of a dinosaur toe bone. Now, kids, this is going to be complicated, so listen carefully. The reason he had such big toe bones is because he had big toes. How many can figure that out with no help? Okay? He had those big toes because he had a big foot. There's a kid taking a bath in a brachiosaur footprint. Now, he had that big foot because he had a big leg to hold up. The front leg is 20 feet tall. The biggest one they ever found was 60 feet tall. They say it'll probably take them 20 years to dig it out of the ground because it is a government project. The heaviest dinosaur, they estimate, weighed about 100 tons. That's equal to 14 school buses put together. That means if he was to come by and step on you, you would be deeply impressed by him. You would be road pizza. Speaking of government projects, I need to share with you my invention. I haven't patented this yet, so please don't beat me to the patent office, okay? But I'm going to be the richest man in the world when I patent this thing. I'm going to save so much money for the highway department, construction crews, and utility companies, and the military. And all I want is 10% of the savings. That's it. I'll be the richest man in the world. I have invented a shovel that will stand up by itself. You won't need to pay those guys to lean on it anymore. Don't you wish you'd thought of that? Anyway, next verse says, he is the chief of the ways of God. He's the chief. That's the Hebrew word reshef. He's the chief. He's the principal. He's the biggest animal God made. Well, that would not be the elephant hippopotamus. It would be the brachiosaurus. And you know, it kind of fits the pattern for the way the devil works. Whenever God makes things, the devil tries to destroy them. God invented music. God loves music. And the devil has twisted it with some ungodly music you shouldn't listen to. Somebody asked me one time, and they said, Brother Hovind, you know what you get if you play country music backwards? I said, no. They said, you get your hound dog, your wife, and your pickup, all back. Oh, yeah, backmasking. I heard about that stuff. And God invented marriage and the family and sex. God made them male and female, and he understands it pretty good, and he put some rules down. Boys, don't touch the girls till you're married to them. Now, if you don't want to touch them, stay away from me, okay? I saw your kind in San Francisco when I was out there. But God put the rules down because he wants the best. See, the Bible says the adulteress will hunt for the precious life. God doesn't want you to spend your life hunting for the precious life. He wants you to have the precious life. And you will wreck everything if you don't do it God's way. And God created the great creatures. See, God made the dinosaurs. And the devil said, you know, there has to be some way I can use dinosaurs against God. But the devil couldn't fool Adam. He named him. If the devil would have said, hey, Adam, did you know dinosaurs lived millions of years ago? Adam would say, devil, you are really dumb. Come out in the backyard. There's one eating off the cherry tree right now. The devil couldn't fool Noah, not with dinosaurs anyway. Noah fed them every morning. But for the next 4,000 years, they became pretty rare. They were dying off or being killed off. And by 1809, most of them were gone. And somebody found the bones and put one together in 1809. Then they started finding lots of these bones and putting them in museums. And in 1841, somebody made up the word dinosaur. And the devil said, you know, here's my chance. Ooh, I've been waiting 6,000 years for this. These animals have always lived with man. Now, I know that, and God knows that. But these people don't know that. So the devil said, I think I'm going to tell them they lived millions of years ago. And if they believe it, it'll make them doubt the Bible. And boy, has it worked good. You know, for the last 150 years, boys and girls have gone to kindergarten, and they get a book like this. Boys and girls, we can read about dinosaurs. Would anybody like to take a wild guess what the first sentence in the book says? Millions of years ago, right? And those kids are learning to doubt the Bible, and they can't even read it yet. Millions of years ago. I mean, the books are full of this. You think there's any books like this in your library at your public school? Any books like this in your public library? Are the kids going to face this stuff on TV programs? Discover Nature program, right? Wild America, whatever. How many kids are being taught that in your town? At your expense? I go to museums all the time, and it just breaks my heart to see all the kids go through and see the dinosaurs, and there's the big sign there, 75 million years ago. You know, somebody ought to take it on themselves as a missionary to these museums to stand outside the door before the kids go in or after the kids come out and hand them a track or hand them a videotape or do something to teach those kids the truth about dinosaurs. The next verse says, he lieth under the shady trees in the covert of the reed and fens. You know, the word fens means the swamp. The biggest swamp in the world is in the middle of Africa. It is gigantic. There it is next to America. Most Americans don't know how big Africa is, but it's huge. Did you know there have been reports of dinosaurs still living in that swamp? Dinosaurs still alive? We got all kinds of stuff on dinosaurs that might still be living, and we'll cover that in the next session. Dinosaurs that might still be alive. Now, I don't want you to think there's millions of them, and you need to be careful when you go to the mall. It's not that way, okay? But there's a few still around, folks, and we have really been deceived about the dinosaurs. We'll take a little break, and we'll come back. We'll talk about dinosaurs still living right now.